So I'm going to come out and say it that Juzo Itami might just be the most famous underseen filmmaker I could think of. Everyone knows Tampopo, or at least everyone knows of it, the quote-unquote ramen western, the noodle slurping comedy that popped up on every cult classic you must see before you die list in the last 30 years. On Letterboxd, more than 160,000 people have logged it as watched. Pretty respectable numbers. But then you look at the rest of Itami's filmography and, well, the noodles get cold. Supermarket Woman limps in with 12,000 logs. A Taxing Woman returns, which, let me tell you, is a sharp, hilarious sequel that deserves your attention, barely scrapes past 1,000. 1,000. That's not just a drop-off. That's falling off a cliff and hitting every rock on the way down. Now, I should pause here and clarify something. People get very touchy about the word underrated. Now, when I say someone is underrated, what I mean is simple. To whatever degree they are regarded, they should be more regarded. That's all. Juzo Itami isn't some forgotten figure in Japan. He was a lightning rod, a beloved satirist, a box office draw, a guy who can make audiences laugh while poking them squarely in the ribs about politics, consumerism, and organized crime. But abroad, here in the Western world, for too many people, he remains the Tampopo guy, frozen in amber as the man who gave us the greatest movie ever made about soup. To me, that's what underrated looks like. Not obscure, not disrespected, just not celebrated enough, not spoken of in the same breath as, say, Kurosawa or Ozu or Miyazaki. So here's the thing, I've become obsessed with Juzo Itami, because once you start digging, you realize that Tampopo isn't the story, it's just the door. Behind it is a whole run of movies that are funny, sharp, oddly tender, sometimes reckless, and sometimes, depending on who you ask, outright dangerous. His career only lasted about 13 years before ending in tragedy, but in that short time, he made 10 films that feel just as fresh, just as biting, as anything you'll find today. So that's what I want to do here. I want to walk through the story of Juzo Itami, the man, the movies, the themes, the mysteries, to show you why Tampopo is only the beginning. Before he was making movies about ramen cowboys and tax investigators who could outwit Gordon Gekko, Juzo Itami was an actor. And not a small time one either. He popped up in more than 40 films and TV dramas, working with some of Japan's greatest directors, Kon Ichikawa, Nagisa Oshima, Masahiro Shinoda, Suji Terayama. He even went international for a minute, showing up as a Japanese colonel opposite Charlton Heston in 55 Days at Peking, and traded screen time with Peter O'Toole in Lord Jim. He was the kind of actor who could play a very weary company man in one film and then a comedic oddball in the next, most memorably in the film The Family Game in 1983, where he nailed the role as a salaryman dad who barks orders but barely knows his kids. But here's the twist, acting wasn't the end game for Itami. For years, he had been circling film from every angle, commercial designer, TV reporter, essayist, magazine editor, you name it, like someone peeking through every window of the house before finally deciding to walk through the front door. And when he finally did, in his 50s no less, he came crashing in with The Funeral in 1984. The Funeral sounds like it should be dry and procedural on paper. A family patriarch dies, and over the course of 3 days, we watch his relatives handle the logistics of retrieving the body, hosting the wake, and carrying out the funeral rites. That's basically it. No car chases, no courtroom drama, just incense, sutras, and a lot of family members trying to keep their composure. And yet, The Funeral is remarkable. I was floored by how funny and poignant it is, sometimes in the same breath. Itami's observational wit and gift for framing transform what could have been a stiff ritual drama into something sly and human. There's a brilliant moment where the family is squirming behind a priest, their legs are cramping during a long chant, and Itami cuts to extreme close-ups of their shifting toes and their crackling joints. And it's like this small reminder that even in our most solemn moments, we're still just people trying not to fall over. There's another great sequence where two characters watch an instructional video on the proper etiquette of greeting mourners. what to say, how to bow, where to sit. It's strange and it's almost absurd, but also oddly touching because beneath the ritual is the need for structure when everything else feels uncertain. Having grown up in a religious household myself and even serving as an altar boy, I remember questioning the point of little ceremonial details, why we carried candles, why we stood in certain places in the altar at certain times. The answers never really mattered. What mattered was the comfort that those rituals gave to people in the middle of grief or in the middle of worship. The funeral captures that beautifully, showing how mourning isn't just emotional, but also kind of bureaucratic. It's physical, sometimes quietly hilarious. And the film is visually stunning and full of inventive touches, POV shots from the deceased, sweeping rotations, camera angles that bring unexpected life to ordinary moments. Looking back now, you could see its fingerprints all over the kind of intimate offbeat dramas that A24 has made popular in the last 10 to 15 years, like The Farewell with Awkwafina. As far as debuts go, it's extraordinary, a poignant, gently comic exploration of death and tradition that already announced the kind of filmmaker that Itami was going to be. And then we get if there's one Itami film that needs no introduction, it's Tampopo. It takes the tropes of John Wayne's swagger and Sergio Leone myth-making and drops them into a dingy noodle shop in Japan. At the time I first saw this movie, I didn't jot down much because I didn't realize how much it would actually come to define my relationship to Itami's work. But looking back, Tampopo really was the gateway, the film that opened the floodgates, that gave me a taste of the manic, generous universe that Itami was creating. On the surface, it's a simple story, and that's something we're going to come back to again and again. A truck driver and his sidekick roll into town and help a struggling widow, Tampopo, perfect her ramen and make her ramen shop the best it can be. But Itami spins the framework into something much bigger. The movie plays like a tumbleweed itself, rolling through genres, vignettes, and tones, picking up scraps of culture and philosophy as it goes. Between the ramen quest, we're treated to these side stories, like businessmen terrified of stepping outside of their boss's palate, only for one junior employee to order extravagantly. Or a finishing school lesson in proper spaghetti etiquette that collapses into a cacophony of slurping, or a gangster and his lover blurring the lines between appetite, sex, and death. All of it circles the same point. Appetite is universal, and pleasure should belong to everyone, not just the wealthy or the refined. And that's what always stuck with me, Itami's populism. Just as ramen, cheap, accessible, endlessly variable, can be elevated into art, Itami elevates everyday life into cinema. He doesn't sneer at low tastes or small pleasures, he revels in them. And yet, the movie never feels sloppy or indulgent. Every shot, every edit, every cutaway gag is carefully placed. Tampopo is alive and sprawling, but it's also meticulous. What makes Tampopo so endlessly rewatchable is the way that Itami keeps it moving with such verve. The editing is quick and playful, scenes stitched together with a rhythm that feels like jazz. His staging and blocking constantly shift your perspective, turning even a simple exchange into a small visual spectacle. And the score ties it all together, cheeky and buoyant, giving the film its unmistakable pulse. For all its wild detours and strange characters, Tampopo somehow feels like a warm, fuzzy blanket. It's comforting, it's alive, and it's always ready to be wrapped around you again. Okay, so now we're getting into some of Itami's more underseen stuff. After the international splash of Tampopo, Itami shifted gears in 1987 with A Taxing Woman, a satirical procedural about tax audits. Yeah, seriously. The film follows Ryoko, played once again by Itami's wife, Nobuko Miyamoto, someone who I'm going to mention many, many more times throughout this video, and you're going to have to bear with me, but she is phenomenal in all of Juzo Itami's films. She plays a relentless investigator who sets her sights on Hideki Gondo, a sleazy but slippery hotel magnate suspected of hiding a fortune from the government. What follows is less cat and mouse chase than battle of wills, with Ryoko and Gondo circling each other like noir detectives and crime lords. Except the weapon of choice here isn't a gun, but a stack of falsified receipts. On paper, this shouldn't work. A movie about tax evasion sounds like the cinematic equivalent of doing your own spreadsheets, but in Itami's hands, it's electric. The camera is alive, the editing is sharp, the scenes of investigators rummaging through garbage piles for hidden documents have the same pulse as a police raid in a crime thriller. And by the final act, when the tax bureau storms a suspected front, Itami stages it with all the urgency of the FBI closing in on Buffalo Bill and The Silence of the Lambs. I found myself transfixed by how he balances tone, which makes it hard to tell if the film is celebrating these tax auditors' dedication to the job or skewering them. Either way, I couldn't look away. And then, my God, there's the score for this movie. It is jazzy, propulsive, it's riffing on LA noir and 70s cop shows. Every single time it kicked in, it turned tax fraud into high drama. And honestly, I still listen to it on its own. I put it on my everyday playlist that I put on Spotify. Nobuko Miyamoto, like I mentioned, is always magnetic, and here is no different. She's the kind of performer who can ground the satire with such charm and conviction. So if Tampopo is where Itami perfected his whimsical, food-obsessed comedy, A Taxing Woman shows him flexing a different muscle. There's dry wit sharpened into satire with the machinery of government bureaucracy replacing bowls of ramen. It might miss a bit of the warmth and whimsy of Tampopo, but as a piece of genre alchemy, transforming tax audits into suspense, it's kind of a marvel. And it's another Itami banger that everyone should check out. But honestly, let me tell you, the hits keep on coming with his next film. One year after A Taxing Woman, Itami brought back Nobuko Miyamoto's Ryoko for A Taxing Woman's return in 1988, and this time, the stakes are even higher. Not just sleazy hotel owners hiding profits, but an entire religious cult shielding its wealth behind the facade of faith. Ryoko once again leads the charge, and what could have been a dry procedural about financial fraud becomes another sharp, hilarious satire of corruption, devotion, and the absurd lengths people will go to in the name of either money or God. And let me just tell you, this movie rips. Honestly, I liked it more than the first A Taxing Woman. There's a part of me that might even like it more than Tampopo. And I know that that's not really the consensus, but I might just die on this hill. Everything in this movie clicks for me, the blocking, the staging, the lighting. Itami and his crew make every frame pop with energy to the point where I wanted to pause every 10 seconds just to admire the compositions. And like its three predecessors, it's essentially a film about process, stakeouts, undercover infiltrations, raids. There's this undercover sequence in the cult temple that had me laughing harder than I have in ages. And there was a scene where a group of auditors are getting kicked out of the temple by all of the believers, and it's a perfect blend of satire and slapstick. It felt like something out of a Coen Brothers movie or out of Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice. And what's remarkable is how Itami threads this theme across his filmography, the collective fighting back against corruption or adversity. This is something that will come up again and again in this video. In Tampopo, it's a ragtag team uniting to make the ultimate ramen. In A Taxing Woman and its sequel, it's the tax bureau taking on cheats and swindlers, and each time he makes it feel new and vibrant and alive. Combine that with the absolutely, again, killer score, again riffing on noir and cop drama stylings, and now permanently stuck in my daily playlist, and you've got a sequel that not only stands tall, but in my opinion surpasses the original. And of course, again, there's Nobuko Miyamoto. Her entrance in this movie had me cheering like when Captain America summoned Thor's hammer. She's just magnetic, she's commanding, and essential to the whole Itami enterprise.
しっかり押さえて、はい、そこでご挨拶、はい、座って、はい、手ついて、手もっと前、胸でお辞儀する、はい、そうじゃ背中が見えちまうだろう。So after two Taxing Woman films, Itami and Miyamoto shift gears a bit. Tales of a Golden Geisha follows Naoko, a geisha said to possess a lucky bone that brings fortune to her patrons. When she falls in love with a bank manager engaged to be married to the daughter of one of the bank's biggest clients, she ends up moving in with him only to discover that his appetites and entanglements drag her into a world of corruption, crime, and betrayal. And I like this a bit less than the rest of Itami's catalog, but
That certainly doesn't mean there isn't anything to love here. For starters, the performance by Nobuko Miyamoto is beautiful and heartbreaking and might just be her best performance in all of Itami's filmography. The cinematography, the staging, the blocking are stunning as always. The story threw me for a loop several times, and while I'm sure that my, how should I put this, Western ignorance around Japanese customs was impeding my ability to fully understand and grasp this film, like I'm still not really sure what a geisha is, it was still a profound perspective on a love story mixed with the usual Itami crime subplots. Also, the humor is still here, just a little bit more subdued. At one point, one character talks about how he's able to hang a brass tea kettle off of his erection, and I nearly spit out my drink. And the blending of tones is so well accomplished here, with the film going to some pretty dark places in the back half, as we see Naoko being passed around like a piece of property. Per usual, Itami does struggle with keeping the focus on his female protagonist. There were far too many stretches of this where Naoko is brushed aside in favor of the political backroom dealings and blackmail and talk of bank loans. Not that all of that stuff isn't enthralling to watch unfold, but so often I just want Itami's movies to be her movies rather than have her feel like a supporting player in her own story. The film is less playful in its construction and form than other Itami movies. It has its moments here and there, but overall we sit within scenes longer, the editing is more sparse, and the camera remains static. All of that helps to serve this particular story. It doesn't need the bells and whistles of Tampopo or A Taxing Woman, and I think that Itami understood that.
えらいことしてくれやんけ。地元のヤクザがな、手引けちゅってこのわしを脅しに来たやろ。あぐれ！お前、極道に喧嘩させるんか？あ？
Now, if Tales of a Golden Geisha was Itami's slow-burning drama, then Minbo is his stick of dynamite. On paper, it's about an upscale Tokyo hotel that hires a lawyer to chase the Yakuza off their property before an international conference. In practice, it's the movie that got Juzo Itami in some serious trouble. It's an unflinching, satirical portrayal of organized crime that enraged the Yakuza so much that it led to a retaliatory attack on Itami himself, and some have even speculated that it played a role in his untimely death, but we'll get to that later. Watching this film today, it still feels a little dangerous, like I'm crossing some invisible line just by pressing play. And yet, despite that danger, the film crackles with humor and vitality. Itami just can't help himself. There's this hotel chase sequence with a collapsing wedding cake and little visual gags sprinkled throughout. These flourishes keep the film from collapsing under the weight of its very real menace. What's more striking, though, is its moral clarity. Like Tampopo and the Taxing Woman films, Minbo zeroes in on one very specific corner of society, hospitality in this case, and frames it as a front line in the larger war of right versus wrong. Itami was the poet laureate of process, obsessed with showing how communities rally together against corruption or grief, whether it's a ramen shop, a family maneuvering through funeral proceedings, auditors seeking fraudulent taxpayers, or an entire hotel staff linking arms to face down some gangsters. The final image of defiance in this film could have tipped into parody, but instead, it feels like the purest distillation of Itami's worldview. If we stand together, we can win this. And Miyamoto, as always, is the linchpin. She drifts through these films like a recurring folk hero, always a little different, always ready to tilt the scales of justice, always magnetic, and always with a different hairstyle. If we look at Wes Anderson and see him as building this candy-colored dollhouse universe, then Itami's cinema feels like a parallel world of its own, a series of playful parables about society, decency, and collective responsibility, where we're constantly reminded that we live in a world built on fragile rules, and we need each other to keep them from collapsing. And just to reiterate, this film led to an attack on Itami's life. There's an interview with the New York Times that I'll link below where he discusses the attack and what it means, what it represents for him, a reinforcing of the sense that the Japanese ought to do better at standing up for themselves as individuals. He said, "The fact that I was attacked proves that what I pointed out in my film was correct. If I was wrong, they wouldn't have reacted so strongly." Later in that same interview, he discusses his next film after Minbo, which is...
おいおい、人生なんか持ち出すなよ。人生は私の仕事じゃないよ。私が扱うのはあくまでも病気が体であって。俺の体だ。お前がメスを入れてんのは俺そのものだ。俺の人生だ。俺の幸せだ。お前のメスのために俺の体があるんじゃないんだよ。
If Minbo nearly got him killed, then The Last Dance is the film that he made while staring death in the eyes. After the Yakuza's attack left him maimed, Itami turned inward, making what is easily his most personal work, a meditation on mortality disguised as a slyly tender tragic comedy. The story follows Buhai, a hard-living, womanizing alcoholic actor who learns that he has terminal cancer and begins his slow march toward the inevitable. Rentaro Mukuni delivers an astonishing performance. His transformation from denial to terror to acceptance is played with such raw humanity that you almost forget you're watching a character at all. And yet, in classic Itami fashion, the movie refuses to just sit there and wallow. For every scene of despair, there's a burst of levity, a chuckle snuck into the darkest corners of existence. Buhai makes a joke on his deathbed because he seems to be taking too long to die. He says, it's like taking a friend to the station to see him off and the train won't leave, and suddenly the room just exhales. The imagery in this movie is kind of unforgettable. There's this afterlife sequence. There's a part where the spirit's tethered to its corporeal body snaps when a doctor walks past it. But what really lingers is the boldness of Itami's critique. See, in Japan, families often conceal terminal diagnoses from patients. Here, Itami insists on radical transparency, arguing that the dying deserve the agency to exit on their own terms. The film is ultimately a rejection of the way that modern Japanese have tried to banish death from their lives. Itami even said, traditionally, when people were about to pass away, they stayed at home, surrounded by the people close to them. The dying person was the central actor. People had this idea of a gallant death, done with deep bravery. People around them accepted the fact that this person is about to pass away and communicated with them. There was a culture of death. Itami then later said people now use science. Science means the defeat of death. They no longer want to look death in the face. Death is worthless, scary, like something you flush from your house. You take this person to the hospital because you don't want this thing to happen in your house. This film is harrowing, it's funny, and it's oddly comforting. The camera slows down, the editing breathes, the playfulness is more subdued, but the beating heart of his cinema, that restless mix of joy and dread, remains fully intact. And like so much of his work, The Last Dance feels criminally underseen. This isn't just Itami's cancer movie. It's one of the great films about dying that I think I've ever seen. Full stop. It would make for an excellent triple feature with All That Jazz and Ikiru. It also makes sense that after 5 films in which his wife, Nobuko Miyamoto, got to be the central player, Itami allowed himself to be the inspiration for the protagonist. In a way, it really feels like his most personal film in his whole filmography. It truly feels like Itami saying, this is how I want to go out. Which, as we'll see, only makes it all the more tragic that he didn't get his wish.
この絵日記もおしまいね。何か題をつけなければいけないわ。そうだいいよ。あなたはタイトルの名人なんだし。
Now, if The Last Dance was Itami staring death in the face, A Quiet Life is him stepping sideways into someone else's skin. For the first time in his career, he wasn't working from his own original script, but adapting a novel from a Nobel Prize-winning author who also happened to be his brother-in-law. And you feel that shift immediately. Gone are these satirical jabs, the buoyant humor, the sly digs at bureaucracy. Instead, this is Itami working in another writer's register. The story follows Machan, a teenage girl tasked with caring for her older, mentally disabled brother while their parents are away. From there, the film drifts almost like a memory, self-contained vignettes that range from tender to unsettling. One moment, Machan is beaming with pride as her brother swims across a pool unassisted. The next, she's sitting in the home of her brother's swimming coach, who has a shadowy past rumored to include a double murder. The effect is disarming because life itself is disarming. Quiet mornings bleed into shocking revelations, and what feels small in the moment often proves transformative years later. That's the heart of the title. The Quiet Life isn't really quiet at all, it's just life in its full, unpredictable strangeness. There was an aspect of this film that hit me pretty hard, aside from the brother-sister bond. It was a moment with the father, a somewhat famous writer who sees his own masculinity crumbling in slow motion. There's a scene where he tries and fails to unclog a water pipe in their yard, only for a plumber to swoop in and fix it within seconds. The father then sulks, he's reduced, he's convinced that he's failed as a man. It was a small, almost throwaway moment, but it echoes the way memories of parents lodge within us, their strengths, their failings, their fragile sense of self. And watching it, I found myself thinking of Charlotte Wells' Aftersun, another film about a child's perception of her father. those memories that return years later with sharper teeth than we expect. And then there's the ending of this film, which I'm not going to spoil, not that this is really a movie you can spoil, but there's a closing shot that was so quietly beautiful. And for a film that initially left me lukewarm, I've caught myself turning this film over and over in my head in the days and weeks since watching it. Stylistically too, the film feels like an outlier in Itami's oeuvre. The camera is restrained, the humor is nearly absent, the score was tipping toward melodramatic piano flourishes, and watching it, I thought less of Tampopo and more of Maurice Pialat or late-period European art house films. Films where the shape of memory matters more than the plot. It's tempting to see A Quiet Life as an anomaly, but I think it's more revealing than that. Just as Bob Fosse followed the self-reflective All That Jazz with the bleaker Star 80, Itami followed The Last Dance with this. A film wrestling with familial trauma, responsibility, how we reckon with the past, and the messiness of memory. It shows us a side of him we rarely got to see, one that's patient and understated. If it lacks the levity and wit that defines his best-known work, it more than makes up for it by expanding our sense of what an Itami film could be.
6年3組の
井上花子。お前生きてたのか。
お前もよく生きてたな覚えてるか2人で学芸会で踊ったの
覚えてる覚えてる。お前がお姫様で。
お前はタヌキ
Now, if Tampopo was my gateway into Juzo Itami, Supermarket Woman was the film that solidified my obsession and sent me tumbling down the rabbit hole of his work. On paper, it's a simple premise. A failing supermarket gets a second chance thanks to the pluck and ingenuity of Nobuko Miyamoto's character, a woman with enough charm and resourcefulness to put a corporate MBA to shame. In execution, it's something far stranger and more delightful. As I mentioned before in this video, Itami is, above all else, a poet laureate of process. He relishes in the nitty-gritty details of how ordinary people take control of their circumstances. In Tampopo, it's the painstaking construction of the perfect ramen shop. In A Taxing Woman, it's the nuts and bolts of catching fraudsters. In Minbo, it's the meticulous steps required to rid a hotel of Yakuza parasites. And in Supermarket Woman, that same energy is redirected toward the oddly heroic task of building the ideal grocery store, reorganizing shelves, finding the freshest produce, chasing down shoplifters, and reshaping an entire workplace culture one laugh at a time. What could have been mundane becomes magical in Itami's hands. He zooms in on what makes a supermarket thrive, the way a fairy tale might explain what makes a spell work. Suddenly, shelf placement or a properly labeled discount feels like high drama because for Itami, it is. These are the details that shape how people live, how they eat, how they work together, and at the center, again, sorry to keep beating this dead horse, is Nobuko Miyamoto giving maybe the most charming performance of her career. She's got this manic pixie energy, sure, but also the guts, the wit, the sheer force of will to make change happen. Watching her transform a rundown grocery store into a vibrant community hub feels less like a workplace comedy and more like a Looney Tunes fable, complete with scenes as gleefully absurd as her chasing down a meat thief while dressed in a penguin mascot suit. And like Tampopo, the film is joyous, it's surreal, it's bursting with cartoon energy, but Supermarket Woman sharpens the idea that has been humming through all of Itami's work, that collective effort, careful attention, and a touch of absurdity can transform the everyday into something miraculous. This is far and away my favorite of Itami's films. It hits that sweet spot of charm, humor, crime, process, and that warm and fuzzy feeling when everything works out in the end. He ends the film with credits playing over a shot that just left a giant grin on my face. Seriously, if you've only seen Tampopo, I urge you to give this one a shot, and then like me, you might be so smitten that you go down the entire rabbit hole yourself.
あなたを捨て、あの大シーザーに身を寄せなければ、彼らは容赦なく私のエジプトを攻め滅ぼすでしょう。私はエジプトを救うため、おぞましいシーザーの側下にひざまずき。
Itami's final film, Woman in Witness Protection, feels like both a continuation of his return to form and a quiet farewell. After the restrained and meditative work he did on A Quiet Life, in Supermarket Woman and here, He dusts off the old tricks, the roving camera, the zippy editing, an upbeat score that sneaks in between moments of tension, and a cast of zany side characters who light up the margins. And yet, there's a subtle patience here, a weight that hangs over the comedy, as if Itami knew that this was a different kind of balancing act. On its surface, this is one of Itami's tensest films. Nobuko Miyamoto plays a diva actress who's suddenly thrust into witness protection after she witnesses a murder. Here, witness protection just means that she has 24-hour round-the-clock protection from two police officers. One is a super fan, and the other is a hard nut to crack who doesn't watch movies. For once, the stakes are less about ramen shops or tax evasion or supermarkets, and more about life and death, whether she could survive long enough to testify in court. Itami still sneaks in bursts of levity. That humorless cop I mentioned is forced to play an extra in a stage play, only to bomb spectacularly. But make no mistake, this is one of his closest things to a straight-up thriller. Like so many of his movies, though, it's also a love letter to process. In A Taxing Woman, it was the tax office. In Supermarket Woman, it was grocery stores. Here, it's the criminal justice system and the moral weight of civic responsibility. Itami's worldview was famously black and white, his cops all dutiful Boy Scouts, and his villains, here a shadowy cult of zealots. They're thinly sketched, but they're kind of chilling nonetheless. Online culture, meanwhile, has turned cynicism into its own kind of performance art, where nihilism is the punchline and sincerity is suspect. Dropping into an Itami film like Woman in Witness Protection can be disarming precisely because it refuses those instincts. It dares to believe in the possibility of institutions working as intended, of individuals choosing responsibility over self-interest, of good and evil being not just knowable, but actionable. That defiance of cynicism is part of what makes the film so bracing today. It's a reminder that clarity itself can be radical. And then there are the digressions, the little Itami-isms that remind you that this is still the guy who made Tampopo. There's a karaoke bar arrest that plays out with bruising, muddy exhaustion before Itami tags the moment with this pratfall of a laugh. An officer is being mocked for studying American literature by his superior. Even the killer, with his facial tics and his bursts of casual violence, feel more like a Coen Brothers creation than a Japanese crime film villain. Seriously, the opening murder scene of this movie feels like it could have directly inspired the Coen Brothers when they made Fargo or Burn After Reading. Watching it now, it's impossible not to think about where he might have gone next. This is a confident, lively film from a director who is experimenting with CGI, still pushing himself, still finding new tones to juggle. It's not just the last Itami film. It's proof that he was far from finished, that his voice would have only gotten sharper and stranger into the 21st century, which makes the loss sting all the more. Watching it now, you can't help but wonder what else he might have had up his sleeve. Juzo Itami's death in 1997 shocked the film world, and the circumstances have never been entirely clear. Officially, it's considered a suicide, reportedly coming just days after a tabloid was threatening to publish claims about an affair he was having. On the surface, that's the story. A tragic end for a man at the peak of his creative powers. That is, of course, one possibility. The other is a bit darker. As we established earlier, Itami had made enemies with some very dangerous people. His satirical takedowns of the Yakuza were infamous, and one film, Minbo, even led to the violent attack that left him physically scarred. Some have suggested that he might have been coerced into his final leap from his office building, forced to choose between life and death, in a way that would seem unimaginable to most. Whether that's true or whether the pressure of scandal and personal turmoil was enough to break him, we'll probably never know. But what's clear is that the world lost one of its boldest, sharpest voices far too soon. And yet, despite the mystery and tragedy surrounding his death, Itami's films endure in a way that feels almost defiant. For me, watching them isn't just about appreciating clever framing, sharp editing, or brilliant performances. It's about stepping into a universe where the world makes sense, or at least where it can make sense if people do the work. In 2025, that clarity feels radical. We live in a moment in time when distrust is baked into the very air we breathe, when institutions are assumed to be corrupt, and when morality is often framed as negotiable. Against that backdrop, slipping into an Itami film is disarming in the most satisfying way. He dares to show a world where systems can function, where justice can prevail, and where ordinary people choosing to act with decency actually matters. I think I gravitate to his films because I share that philosophy, or maybe because I wish more of the world worked that way. There's something profoundly comforting, even exhilarating, about watching a ramen shop come together to save itself, a supermarket community link arms against cutthroat competition, or a tax bureau meticulously hunting down fraudsters. And yet, that comfort is never naive. Itami shows how delicate the balance is, how one small domino tipped the wrong way can send everything crashing down. There's a precision and care in the way he constructs these worlds, a respect for process that feels almost spiritual. It reminds me, as someone who obsesses over detail and human systems, that the mundane can be heroic, that responsibility and moral clarity aren't abstract ideals, they're practical tools for survival and justice. And yet, the thrill of his films is never chaotic. Every camera movement, every edit, every timing of a gag or punchline feels deliberate. It feels alive, it feels energetic, but always controlled. Itami's mastery lies in making the world feel vibrant and precarious at the same time, as though he's choreographing both life and comedy down to the smallest detail. That tension between spontaneity and control, the sense that anything could tip over, yet nothing is left to chance, is part of why I keep returning to his films. The slapstick moments, the absurd side characters, the tonal zigzags between tension and comedy, they aren't just gags. They're a recognition that life is chaotic and often terrifying, but that even in that chaos, structure matters. That even in the face of seemingly insurmountable forces, whether corrupt businessmen, zealots, or the shadows of the Yakuza, people can still act with integrity. They can act with courage, they can act with ingenuity. It's a worldview that feels both old-fashioned and urgently needed. A kind of moral compass wrapped in laughter and silliness. And maybe in a world that often seems to have forgotten all that, that's reason enough to keep singing Juzo Itami's praises. So if you made it this far into the video, I hope you'll join me in doing so. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I had a blast watching all of these movies, making this video, writing this essay. This was absolutely so much fun. I think Juzo Itami is a genius and he needs to be celebrated way more. And I'm hoping I could sort of spread the gospel a little bit. And I hope people made it through this whole thing. I know it's a long one, but I hope that it enticed people to check out his work. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on this channel. You can follow me on Letterboxd to see what I'm watching when I'm watching it. And I will see you all next time.